Please join me in welcoming her to UNL.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for inviting me here, I have to say. As a foreigner, I still think of myself as a foreigner. It's really exciting to see what Sarah Palin would call real America, right? The stuff you don't get on TV, although someone can tell me famous films or TV that's set in Lincoln, Nebraska. But it's like really existentially interesting. So the title, what would you do and who would you kill to save the end of the world? It has a minor and a major meaning. The minor meaning is predominantly post-apocalyptic cinema is about vanquishing some enemy in order to save the world, whether it's aliens or the tornado or the virus, right? You have to kill something in order to save humanity. So that looks like it's a disaster film trope. But what I want to argue is that's a question, who would you kill in order to save the world? What would you do and who would you kill in order to save the world? Is a question we're asking, we don't ask ourselves every day, but we should be asking ourselves every day. So the very fact that I'm standing here tonight in these lovely surroundings required the death of many humans. I mean, America's built on slavery for a start, but that's not where it ends, right? And every decision we make every day produces 1,000 deaths at least elsewhere on the globe. And we make that decision, more or less. I mean, we don't decide it. So that's where it comes from. So what I'm going to talk, I do have a written talk, but I tend to sort of jabber around it, but it will have 4 or 5 sections depending on time. First section is what is the politics of extinction. The second section is what is unthinkable. And then the third section is what would you do and who would you kill in order to save the world. So there's a preamble before I get to that. And then some other stuff, but it depends. So here's the beginning on the politics of extinction. And I'm going to refer to a film, I'm not sure whether many of you or all of you have seen it, but it's Cormac McCarthy's The Counsellor from 2013. And generally the plot is very Cormac McCarthy, but it's a very standard plot where the counsellor, who's a lawyer, makes one bad drug deal and then ends up with Mexican drug cartels and moves from civilization to barbarism. So that's the classic Cormac McCarthy narrative where you're always one bad drug deal away from the end of the world. And the end of the world is Mexico, right, where law doesn't apply and someone's always about to decapitate you, right? Even though it's a cliche, it's something that isn't it isn't unique to Cormac McCarthy, obviously, that the end of the world is Africa or the end of the world is Mexico, right? So that goes back to Conrad's Heart of Darkness and so on. So the two scenes I want to at least think about. The beginning of the film, Cameron Diaz, who's dressed in leopard print, watches, like while having a cocktail, 2 animals, wild cats, destroy each other, like tear themselves. You know, like one eats the other. And she just has an evening aperitif while watching this happen. This is what I, as an English literature person, was trained to diagnose as depoliticization, right? It's the way of the world is just violence and nature is red in tooth and claw. And what we think of as civilization is really just a mask or a veneer that covers over a natural or default barbarism. It's an idea that goes back to Hobbes and state of nature. You know, all you've got to do is remove the thin fabric of civilization and we're all destroying each other. So that seems to be like the classic depoliticizing motif and the classic English department, feminist, Marxist criticism is to intervene and say what you think of as, you know, the human condition, we're one step away from barbarism, is really political, economic, racial, and sexual. Right? So that's the normal way of diagnosing these things. What I want to do in thinking about the politics of extinction is say that what makes a film like Cormac McCarthy's interesting in the 21st century is that the usual response we have to those depoliticizing moments in film where life is just inhumane and violent and we're all one step away from barbarism, Lord of the Flies, Conrad's Heart of Darkness, but Cormac McCarthy's Counsellor. What I want to suggest is that we think differently about that in the 21st century, and for this reason. The political climate, and I'm using the word political climate in two senses. Okay, one is the political climate in which we should question the extent to which we want to attribute things like violence, barbarism, bloodthirstiness, ruthlessness, dehumanization to some moment of pre-state, pre-civilizational behaviour. So what has become, I think, obvious in the 21st century is that it's the state, right, and civility that is like the two animals tearing themselves apart, right? So that in the Cormac McCarthy world where Mexico is the end of the world, that's where you get drug cartels and people that will decapitate you if you look at them in a funny way. That ruthlessness is actually the state, right? And we look to what McCarthy sees as the end of the world, Mexico. I mean, Mexico isn't Mexico, it's like a fictional planet in Cormac McCarthy. You always head into Mexico and the thin veneer of civilization falls away. That actually what might be the beginnings of another world is Mexico, if that makes any sense. So instead of saying what Conrad depicted in Heart of Darkness as Africa as a figure at the end of the world, what the 21st century is forcing us to think about is that what has always called itself the world is actually the end of the world. And what looks like the end of the world is the possible new world. So if you think of Conrad's Heart of Darkness, Belgium, not that I want to offend any Belgians in the audience, but like the high civility, because the odds of a Belgian being in the audience is so high, but the centre of civility is really the centre of barbarism, and what one is trying to avoid, the end of the world is really a possible new world. So what I want to do in thinking about the politics of extinction is think about what I said is looking at our political climate and the way our political climate exists within a broader milieu of climate in the meteorological sense. And what we can see is it's true in a classic Hobbesian sense that what we think of as the polity does protect us from the world out there, right? The fact that you're in Washington and you're debating impeachment does protect you from the climate, but that's not civility, that's the end of the world, right? So the end of the world is actually probably, not that I'd like to point out I'm not a Trump supporter who thinks that impeachment is necessarily a bad thing, although I do think it's sort of a disaster, right, that we think that that's where our political energies should lie, when really that's the catastrophe, is that that scale of the political. So the first thing I want to do, what is the politics of extinction? Short answer, politics of extinction imposes itself upon us to think of what we think of the end of the world, Cormac McCarthy's Mexico, is actually not the end of the world. Right? And that holding on to the world, holding on to Washington DC as opposed to Mexico, is probably the end of the world. So saving the world is the end of the world. If that makes any sense. Okay, so that's the preamble. So now the second section is what is unthinkable. So one might think of unthinkability as a way of comparing different environments, so that we might briefly conclude that given our current desires, habits, expectations, and bodily composition, we struggle to imagine what the statistics on climate change appear to be telling us will happen. So what I'm thinking of is a very concrete unthinkability. I took an aeroplane here to do this. In a sense, that's absolutely crazy, right? And Roland's got kids and invited me to do this, right? In a sense, that's just the most, that just shows how unthinkable what's really happening is. I mean, I'm still doing it, we're all still here in a lighted auditorium. The consequences of what we're doing right now are catastrophic. But it's really hard. I find, well, obviously I find it hard to assimilate because I'm still here, right? I'm not in a state of panic. I'm not trying to mobilise climate activism right now. So the urgency doesn't, so that's one level of unthinkability. We're so embedded in this life, it's almost impossible to think otherwise. So we might think of this as a political unthinkability, as an inability to have the imaginative reach to accept that something is happening, along with an inability to accept that we could live in such a way. So, now I think there's definitely something of this exercise in the limits of our political imagination in post-apocalyptic cinema. The more we witness the destruction of the world in post-apocalyptic cinema, and it's always the first world, right? The genocide of the Indigenous Australian people is not the end of the world, right? That's what you needed to have this world, right? So the end of the world is always Manhattan, sometimes LA, occasionally London. I think 28 Days Later shows you a little bit of the Eiffel Tower. There's a frozen Sydney Opera House, but it's pretty much Manhattan. Right? It's not Nebraska, right? It's not Lincoln, Nebraska. You'll be happy to know Lincoln, Nebraska is not the end of the world. This place ends, right? It's not the end of the world, so it's okay. So there can be a tragic witnessing of the destructions of cities and worlds, but always with the redemptive conclusion that the world has been saved. So a classic motif of post-apocalyptic cinema is to see Shanghai blow to the ground. Definitely Middle East, that can go. You see some sort of vague image of Africa, Asians, inscrutable Asians, they can all go. And the world is saved. It's lamentable, but it's not the end of the world, right? So, and eventually some pocket of the world has been saved, usually Manhattan. There is almost something phenomenological about post-apocalyptic cinema. How much can we imagine losing that would be short of the end of the world, right? And in some cases it's extreme. In a film I'll be talking about, I Am Legend, there's basically one little bit of humanity left in New Hampshire, right? That's the pocket at the end of the world. And but it's still seen as the humanity was saved, right? Because there were some Americans left. Not that I've got anything against Americans, just like to point that out. Don't want my citizenship revoked. So now here's a point I want to make about this logic. I want to claim that it is endemic to post-apocalyptic cinema, but that it actually characterises what's left of philosophy in the world today. And to make this case, I want to refer to the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford University. So it's a funded institute at Oxford University, led by the philosopher Nick Bostrom, who argues that we think that catastrophes such as the Holocaust are major existential catastrophes. And he's not saying it wasn't bad. He's saying, but ultimately, look, we recovered. There's the state of Israel and humanity goes on. What we should really be focused on is not these genocides in which humanity survives, but humanity as such. And that's what the Future of Humanity Institute is dedicated to, is saving what he refers to as intelligence and technological maturity. So on that logic, it would be sad if, let's say, all of Australia were wiped out, right? But humanity as such would survive. However, it would be absolutely catastrophic. The difference between that and the destruction of technology as we know it is much greater, right? And governments need to focus on that. So this is a highly funded, philosophically central think tank that repeats the logic of post-apocalyptic cinema. You can watch a lot of destruction, it's lamentable, but as long as you save humanity, there's a moment of triumph. So back to post-apocalyptic cinema. But my claim is, I'm talking about post-apocalyptic cinema, but it really expresses what I would refer to as a logic of the end of the world and humanity. Post-apocalyptic cinema is profoundly majoritarian. Beginning with the end form of our existence, how we are now, we play thought experiments with what we might be able to change, and it seems that we can lament the loss of many worlds. We can watch Shanghai, Sydney fall to the ground, but we cannot think that there's anything other than this world. So we're very happy to entertain mass destruction, but we're not able to contemplate that there could be a world other than the one we have. There's an often quoted phrase, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. I think that's the most stupid thing that ever got re-quoted. Because actually when you look at end of world films, they are just the end of capitalism. Capitalism's gone, right? And it might as well be the end of the world. We're left in a condition of mere subsistence. We're left in the way that most humans have lived. Without TV, without the state, without taxation, without the police force, right? So you remove capitalism, it's the end of the world. So the majoritarian form, and what I also want to argue is that usually the end of the world is usually imagined as the end of cinema, not in the narrow sense of like movie theatres, because they all probably are gone, but the humanity that must be saved is a humanity that's connected to the globe, right? So as long as you have mass media, internet, television, radio, the control room in Washington, DC that is capable of viewing the globe, the world still exists. But the minute you have humans that are just making a living off a farm and have no clue what's happening in Australia or Britain or what's left of the European Union, that might as well be the end of the world. So what I want to argue is that it's unthinkable, right? Not just, so there's the unthinkability of we can't imagine that this is going to go, but a more profound unthinkability, we can't imagine what it's like to be human without that cinematic conception of the world, that in order to exist, I have to be able to turn on the TV and see what, well not in America you don't turn on the TV and see what's happening. Anywhere else in the world you turn on the TV and you see what's happening everywhere else in the world. Here you see what's happening in Congress. But anywhere else, right, to be human is to have a global sensibility, right, that's enabled by technology. So I'm arguing that we should think about unthinkability not in terms of how much we are prepared to sacrifice in order to survive, but this: how much of our survival requires that we do not think? That's my question, right? That we are so embedded in the way we are now that we can't think about what goes into the cost of that cinematic component to the world. So we're so attached, or we so define humanity according to its capacity to have a global sensibility that without that we can't think of what being human would be. It's my go-to example, but I think it's very compelling. Legally, Australia was defined as terra nullius, unoccupied land. When white settlers got there, those same white settlers that said that humans weren't there painted these human bodies that weren't human. But if you looked at the way they were painted in the same way that Joshua Reynolds painted cattle. Like they were just in the environment, right? They didn't have a world, right? They didn't have books then, right? They didn't seem to be building anything. So that it's unthinkable for us that that would be human. Okay. So that's the unthinkable. I'm suggesting that we begin to think about what our media cost us and cost the world. And most of our media is cinematic, including our books, right? Ever since the 18th century, novels have been a way of composing the world. More than that. Okay, here's the third section. What would you do and who would you kill in order to save the world? So I'm going to go through a brief, this is my sort of one academic moment in this talk, which is meant to be academic, but this is where I actually quote someone of worth and luster. In a recent book on animals, the philosopher Christine Korsgaard puts forward an argument about how we value lives and whether some lives have more value than others. I mean, this is the standard thing we do in order to eat meat, right? A human life is more valuable than an animal life. I happen to be a vegetarian, I'm not an animal activist, that's not where this is going. But her claim is, and I think she's writing about animals, but I think it's far more interesting in terms of humans, right? She claims no life has an absolute value. No life has an absolute value. A human life has more value than an animal life for us, but that's because we're human, right? So if I say, why do you value human lives? And I say, well, we can appreciate Beethoven, we read novels, we have morality, right? And that's why we value our lives above animals. But she makes a claim, well, those are values for us. You know, a pig values rolling in the mud, right? And we can't say, well, a pig has a lesser value of existence because that. So her first claim is our values are tethered, right? It makes no sense. We value what is human for us. No life has an absolute value. I think that's a fairly knockdown argument. She's not a crazy, not that that would be a bad thing. She's not a crazy animal activist that wants to give less value to human life. What she wants to do is tether value to human life. The only values we have are the lives we lead. So to make this clear, she has the example that it makes no sense for me to say, oh, I wish I had been Napoleon. Because if I had been Napoleon, I wouldn't have been me. It doesn't make sense. You can't say, I wish I were a cat, because if you were a cat, right? She wants to make this stark, it's the non-substitutability of our lives. So I think this notion of value being tethered to a life for whom values make sense goes beyond the way we value animal lives and has something essentially cinematic about it. But first I want to go back to those white settlers who came into Australia and looked at those lives and saw them as lives not worth living, right? I think that makes perfect sense. For me, to be without books and an iPad, right, and a comfy jacket is life not worth living, because it's me and that's the way I've been composed. It makes no sense to think of that as value as such. And why do I want to argue that this is cinematic? Because, well, my other claim is that, which I won't go into here, but that most Western literature and culture from about the 18th century onwards has been cinematic in this sense. Read 99.9% recurring of novels, it places you in a character's point of view, you take on their world and their values, and then that is the character that must survive, right? So what Western narrative, probably from the 18th century onwards, but particularly cinema, is what must survive is what occupies the point of view of value. So there can be interesting plays on this. I think it was the TV series Dexter, which traced you wanted Dexter not to get caught, and what I'm arguing is there's something cinematic about that. To take on a point of view such that all value is tethered to that point of view. And that's how post-apocalyptic cinema works. We can see most of the globe fall into chaos, death and destruction, but the character for whom we're viewing that is saved, and therefore the world is saved. Right? So that's what I'm saying about tethered value. And in case it's not obvious, I think this has very serious geopolitical and racial implications, right? So that the point of view of the narrative is the one that has value, right? And what must be vanquished is what threatens that point of view. So while it's true that narrative, especially in its modern and novelistic form, relies on a point of view and therefore allows the unfolding of tragedy or happiness to be tethered to the life and lives we are following, cinema has a way of intensifying this possibility. Think of the way in particular the world that must be saved and that cannot be swept away is essentially the cinematic world. Sometimes this is obvious in films like Galaxy, where it's the internet that's going to be destroyed. But very often there's a central control room, usually in Washington DC, but usually in some spaceship central command that manages what bit of the world can be saved. The explicit theme of New York or DC as the control room into which images of misguided leaders and suffering peoples appear is surrounded by implicit scenes in which the loss of the media is the loss of the world. And that includes the loss of books being the loss of the world. Right? We can't imagine. We think that a world in which we don't do this is not a world. We think of people that don't do this as not human. You know, this is reading, not praying. Reading, not praying. We think of that as a form like close reading, as what defines it. But if you think about it, 99% of humans that have ever lived never did this. Right? It's a unique blip in human history. So one of the many ways in which this has been depicted is in the possibility of zombification, which is, of course, the extreme loss of world relations and political beings. Zombies are mere life. Now, there's, of course, a whole racial politics to zombies that's not insignificant. But what I want to draw attention to is the fact that just existing and not having a sense of the world is regarded as the end of the world, and certainly not human. Now, the extreme case of this sort of horror at losing the world occurs in a milieu in which disaster epics rely on the viewer, as I've said, watching massive global destruction only to arrive at the heroic saving of the world. So here's where I start to talk about one specific film, which is I Am Legend of 2007, which, if you haven't seen it, should make sense anyway. If you haven't seen it, it's a remake of a remake, right? So there's the man at the end of the world, Omega Man. So Manhattan seems to hold the world's only survivor, which is played by Will Smith. He subsists on leftover food, so the only way he survives is through the vestiges of industrialisation, canned foods, raids people's fridges, and the last vestiges of cinema and TV. He keeps going to a DVD store. Before streaming, I guess, right? But goes to and he's going through the DVD archive. Two crucial scenes raise the question of what it means to die in order to save the world. So this is getting to the crux of it. Will Smith's dog, the lone survivor's dog, is bitten. And he thinks he takes him home. And we have, as a result of the film, a very affective attachment to this dog. And he sees the first signs of zombification start to appear. He looks at the dog's eyeballs and then has to kill it because it's becoming one of them, not one of us. We see the threshold between the life we save. He does everything to save this dog's life. But as soon as the dog becomes other, he has to kill it. In the case of humans, so the threshold in this dog is it loses its fur, its eyeballs take on a certain notion, and he kills it before it becomes other. Saves it from becoming other. That's what he sees in dogs. In humans, the threshold in this film is cognition and sociality versus zombification. You could be one of them or one of us. This might sound... It's unquestioned that you want to save us, not them, the zombies. You just got to kill them to save your world, right? It's obvious. But I want to raise it, why is it obvious, right? That from the point of view, it's because Will Smith is like us and they're like them. What's really at stake is saving one's own kind. So in the second scene that I want to talk about in the film, before I draw this section to a close, the central character played by Will Smith finally just finds a cure for zombification. But as he does so, the zombies are coming at him through a glass screen. So he hands the zombie cure to the one other survivor who's going to take it to New Hampshire, and then he commits an act of world-saving suicide. But it's still a happy ending, right? Because even though he's died and he's killed the zombies, he's saving humanity, which is in New Hampshire. The glass screen is a division between us and them. So what I Am Legend renders acute, but I think it's in every post-apocalyptic film, is the sense in which a certain type of humanity is defined through certain qualities, Western, urban, affluent. So on the one hand, it's a certain type of humanity that must destroy those with our world, and we're prepared to see the rest of the world in I Am Legend disappear as long as a pocket of New Hampshire is saved. So it's at once political, but it's also purely existential. It must be we who survive, not them. We who view are not those who simply exist. So, post-apocalyptic films look sort of myopically racist, right? It's always the West and the rest of the world. They are myopically racist, but that's not interesting. They're also profoundly metaphysically racist. That is, racism is there to be an us, not them exercise. So here's the last section, which is about the allegory of extinction versus the irony of extinction. So this is my last film, which I think is one of the most profound. It's not a post-apocalyptic film, but I think it brings this to the fore. It's Jordan Peele's film Us. Isn't it? It's awesome, right? Why? So for those of you who haven't, it's hilarious. But it's a home invasion film in which a middle class or upper middle class African American family gets invaded by their doppelgangers or their others, right? So they see a hand-holding family on the driveway, and it's like a home invasion film. They have to run around and escape their doubles. Okay, so at first this is a heavy-handed allegory, and it's very entertaining because of that. The America of affluence and middle-class ease, including upwardly mobile African Americans who befriended the world's most obnoxious white family. The conspicuous consumption white family. The motif of the film is that there's a whole underworld of your double, right? And that they, at some point, created a double of us, right? In order to take on, like, as it were, the slave labour of the world. It didn't work out, so we just buried them, right? So you can see the allegory, it's a heavy-handed allegory. The America of affluence and middle-class ease relies on a tethered underworld who were brought into being to maintain social order, but who appear to have not served that purpose and now return as a repressed, unspeakable, and like zombies, oddly generic double of who we are. So the film too has its cinematically reflexive dimension. After the family seemingly free, so there's a whole disaster thing, and they gradually free themselves from their crazy doubles that are wearing red jumpsuits, which becomes significant. After the family free themselves from their home entrapment by their horrific doubles, they emerge into a world in which the media is reporting the uprising and really struggling to get, and as the media is reporting, you know, these people are being invaded, the doubles just keep coming up and proliferating, so that, and there's these headlines, no one yet knows, so how this happened or how it's going on. The doubles are dressed, and I didn't know that this was a real thing until I researched it, in red jumpsuits holding hands, because there was a campaign called Hands Across America where we all held, empowerment didn't work, but it was to raise money for homelessness. So it was that everyone would have a home, which when you think about it is everyone becomes like us, right? And then everyone does become like... So that's the allegorical dimension, which is America exists on a failed dream of making everyone like us, and it has a tethered underclass, which is, you know, those who were there to maintain social order, but now we can't look at anymore. So it's the underworld of America's slave past. And I've said to a few people, isn't that the best film ever? And I say, but the allegory is so heavy-handed, right? Well, I think it's more than an allegory, not that the allegory as such is bad. I think there's a far more existential dimension. This is my last section. And it has to do with, to get back to the title, it has to do with what you would destroy and who you would kill in order to save the world. In order to survive, in order to save herself and her family, the central character has to kill her own children. I mean, they're the evil other, but she looks at this face of what is her son, and, you know, she's already, there's a good scene where they've already massacred the privileged white family, and there's a sort of allegorical revenge on taking revenge on white privilege, but then it becomes profound when she has to kill her own child. And then, even more profound at the end of the film, where she has to kill herself. So she finally goes down into the underworld and meets her double and has to kill her in order to save the world. Which, as I'm watching it, thinking, this is an allegory of social death, right? She's a middle-class African-American woman, and in order to survive in this world, she has to kill herself, right? I'm thinking, heavy-handed allegory. And yet there's a twist, spoiler alert. The twist, don't mention the twist. See, I think spoilers are okay, because I think by the time we get to the film, we've forgotten them. Yeah. Right? I don't think anyone remembers the spoilers, but so it turns out, and we're cheering her on, yeah, kill your double, kill the evil black woman who can't really speak, you know. She's the only one of the zombies that can sort of speak. And then it turns out in this twist that in our hero's childhood, she had emerged from the underworld, taken the place of the good woman, right? So in the end, the only thing that separates them is that she's them and we're us, right? There's a political explanation to it, that you can put anyone in the underworld and they'll become barbaric. But you've just gone through this cinematic experience and going, yeah, you know, she's strangling this woman, and yeah, kill the beggar. And then you realise you were actually duped. You were cheering for the death of what you should have been trying to save. So one might think of this as an allegory of social death, that in order to live in this world, one either goes through 1,000 tiny deaths, denying one's existence every minute of the day, or one destroys one's world. So there's these two strands in the film, but I think they're in all post-apocalyptic cinema. The double has been assuming the life of the original, only to find that the opposite is the case. What we thought was the evil other is actually ourselves. What we've always been trying to kill to save the world is actually the only other possible world. There's an allegorical dimension where becoming barbaric and inhuman can be traced back to enslavement. But that sets aside the crushing irony where the border between the voice and the copy become untethered. We kill what is not us in order to save the world. That's the message of my talk. We kill what is not us in order to save the world. In part, this question has a literal answer as we today watch the loss of so many worlds. We destroy worlds in order to have this world. But in part it has a figural answer as we exist within ongoing social death. So I wanted to conclude with a quotation from Claudia Rankine, because she's read as a poet of microaggression, right? As something very, very personal that has nothing to do with the catastrophic milieu we're in. But I think every poem, for want of a better word, that she writes is precisely about this world is an for her, right, is an ongoing social death or end of the world. So I'm going to try and read this slowly so that you can get the impact of it. And when I chose this quotation, I could have picked up any bit. I could have just gone through that bit. It wasn't like, oh, I've got to find that bit in Claudia Rankine where. I just grabbed the first one. Every scene is about how within this world there is always an ongoing, either I have to kill who I am in order to exist in this world, or this world constantly demands my non-being. So you're in the dark, in the car, watching the black-tarred street being swallowed by speed. He tells you his dean is making him hire a person of colour when there are so many great writers out there. You think maybe this is an experiment and you're being tested or retroactively insulted, or if you've done something that communicates that this is an okay conversation to be having. Why do you feel okay saying this to me? This is the bit I thought was interesting. You wish the light would turn red or a police siren would go off so you could slam on the brakes, slam into the car ahead of you, be propelled forward so quickly both your faces would suddenly be exposed to the wind. As usual, you drive straight through the moment with the expected backing off of what was previously said. It's not only that confrontation is headache-producing, it's also that you have a destination that doesn't include acting like this moment isn't inhabitable. Hasn't happened before, and the before isn't part of the now as the night darkens. Thank you.
Well, I'll start first. First of all, I also love Us, and there's so many readings of it. But I was thinking about, like, the films, the kind of post-apocalyptic, and I don't mean the crazy ones, but the post-apocalyptic films of the 50s and 60s.
Oh, right, yeah.
And like Five, I don't know
Yes.
if you're familiar with that, which has a kind of weird ending, you know, with the two people in that village.
Yes.
They're not all, I mean, one person's from New York City. I can't remember
Right.
the rest of the other four. And then there's one African-American man, but there's a white woman. I mean, it's very, they attempt a kind of multiculturalism that never really is aspired to in the film. But I'm wondering about, like, what do you see as kind of different between the kind of 50s and 60s Omega Man and then these reimaginings in the kind of 90s and 2000s?
Yeah.
Even though there is kind of, there's media, but it's different.
It is different, but I guess I'll answer that in stages. I see the post-apocalyptic genre as not so much a spectrum. It's all exploring this question: how much would we lose and still think that there was something at the end that we're like, we can, leave the cinema with the world still existing. And it can take versions that aren't the classic US vanquishing of the climate crisis or the zombies or the invaders, right? It can take that form, but it still has that existential question about it. So there's one, the one that, so when I see the earlier films, so that's the first thing I would say.
Yeah.
Now the second you're asking the question about media, it's true that in the 21st century particularly, you see the destruction of global media, right, is the end of the world. Suddenly New York is just this landscape that you might as well be in Central Australia as Bleecker Street, right? So, but what I'm claiming is, when I say media, I don't just mean the internet and TV. I do mean like a form of civilization that is completely tied to reading and being able to imagine. So I would put it, goes way back before cinema, where the task of reading you know, mass media, books are a form of mass media, is that no matter where you exist, the person that I'm reading about in Africa is really just like me, right? And that sort of universalizing conception of humanity and what white settlers brought to Australia and everywhere else, right, was, hey, you know, either you ought to be like us, ideally you're just like us, or we'll breed you such that you're just like us. And that even when that doesn't involve media, it involves you should see yourself as one of us, right? And so I think all these films that contemplate the end of the world, even when they're like 50s, 60s, supposedly nuclear apocalypse, right? It's about losing us.
Right.
It's not really, you know, so I think it's existential, and it's not about losing life, right? It's not even about losing thinking, it's not about losing, it's about losing us, right? In my research, I've looked at like there's a New Zealand film, for example, where some Maoris take over, right, and it is a sort of a bit like us, where the other takes command, right? So there's ways in which the genre is radicalized, but it still has this, that's why I think the fact that that film is called Us sort of almost like totally lifted the curtain on what all cinema is doing, right, which is creating an us. And that we mustn't become like them, and whoever they are, right, they have got to be destroyed in order to save us. Does that answer?
No, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Thanks for a wonderful talk. I'm looking forward to reading some of your books. While you were speaking, I couldn't help thinking so much of your talk is in intense dialogue, I feel, with the colonial theory.
Yeah.
Right? And I particularly enjoyed one of your first arguments about how that Mexico of McCarthy or that Africa of Conrad is seeing them as an end of the world, but you invited us to a thinking of those places,
Yeah.
in that imaginary as the next world.
Yeah.
Right? So my question is a little bit about that, and also related to that, immediately when you were talking about the zombies, and I'm thinking about the origin of the zombie in Haiti and voodoo, right?
Yeah.
And how, on the one hand, the white elites of the rest of the Caribbean were seeing the zombies as a threat of a black revolution in their own islands, right? But on the other hand, the black people of the other Caribbean islands were seeing the zombie as a world to be desired,
Yes.
right? Like
Yeah.
that's it. And on that same vein, I was thinking about the indigenous insurgents in Chiapas, the Zapatistas, who often take the 2012, this end of the world that Hollywood has made into so many things, that is a Maya concept, the end of the Mayan calendar, and use it against Hollywood. They are very good at criticizing Hollywood, right? They talk a lot about Walking Dead and Game of Thrones and all that, right? And they use it to their advantage to sort of say, yes, your world is ending,
Yes.
right? And another one is surging.
Yeah.
I remember mentioning this when I was a graduate student to Michael Hart, and he immediately told me that I have to be careful with romanticization.
Oh, right, yeah.
And the thing is that the question is an honest one there, right? I mean, how can we approach that other view, right, of the not us, of the other, right, of that process of becoming, right, without romanticization?
So the romance, I'll start from the end and work my way back to the beginning. So I'll start with romanticization. Look, I'm a white Australian. I don't want to be an academic that just every time I want to get an alternative looks to Indigenous Australia, right? So because I think you know, there I agree with Michael Hart. But what you can do, and this is where I found the work of Eduardo Viveras de Castro so interesting, is not to romanticize the Indigenous person, like an anthropologist who's just become in love with the, but to actually just imagine what it's like to be there looking at us. That's what I think us. It's not romanticise Indigenous Australia, it's take a critical look at white Australia, right, in the way, so it's a counter-romantic Like, look at the fetishization we have for our own kind, right? So that because you don't want to use the word indigenous as though you could pick up the people of Australia and South America, right? It's like, there's this indigenous worldview. No, you can't do that. But you can say there's this non-indigenous thing that's really weird, right? In its attachment to itself and its capacity to not ask the question, just not ask the question about what am I prepared, who am I prepared to kill in order to, for white Western humanity, that's never a question, right? Is what am I prepared to kill in order to keep my own kind? It's not a question, right? That's my answer to the romanticization. It's not just that, you know, as a white academic, I don't want to own indigenous. No, it's not a PC question. It's actually a tactical question about the problem isn't turning to the indigenous people as the saviour. It's recognising that no one's ever thought that there could be the unthinkable, right? That killing everything in order to save us is just a prima facie good. Right? Whatever must happen, this must we will survive. First thing. What you're saying about the zombies and Haiti, that's why I was like, I don't know, do I really want to talk about zombies because there's that dimension? But the one bit I wanted to draw on was it's the limit case, right? There's other interesting dimensions to the zombies, but the limit case is these are people who just exist, right? They don't have a sense of the other, they don't read Malame or anything like that. And I think that that's our image of human horror, when really, if you have a spectrum, most life just exists, right? And it's happy just existing and not having a sense, what is the problem with zombies? They don't have a sense of humanity, right? They just eat and live, right? They're not eating each other, interestingly, right? So I'm aware of that dimension, the zombie thing, but what I just wanted to draw attention to is how fetishized Western philosophy is with what's the non-zombie, right? A rich sense of your otherness and you as another world, and that I can look at anyone, no matter where they're from, whether they're from Haiti or Indonesia, and I recognise them as one of my kind, right? As opposed to, I'm not sure, what are you exactly? I think that would be a better question rather than you're just like me, So that's the zombie question. Then the decolonial stuff, yes. I mean, that's where I think, not that you can go for authorial intention, but I think in some ways, everything about Cormac McCarthy's Mexico is asking that question. Like, if America didn't have Mexico, it would have to invent it, right? That whatever you do before the wall, right, this has got nothing to do with the current, you have to wall off that world. What world? That world where if you don't behave properly, you'll die, right? Where if you don't really struggle, existence is fragile and nasty and brutish and short, and we have to outsource that, right? We, white, Western, liberal, affluent America, outsources its fragility. Both literally we do, right? But figuratively we do as well, right? We have to have images of disaster zones, right? Where people, look at all those people dying in a flood, look at that, but they're not us, right? That doesn't happen here. And then I think you get these limit cases like Hurricane Katrina or Puerto Rico, where, they wouldn't let this happen to us. Well, you're not quite us, right? So definitely, it has that's probably where I'm coming from. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
So, in regards to films, what do you think of Waterworld? That's kind of funny, but where the hero is the other, and he goes to a certain extent to save humanity, and then abandons them anyway.
Yes.
How do you feel about that?
I have two things to say. One is, I think what's interesting so another thing that runs through not just Waterworld, but a lot of films where it's taken from the point of view of the other, right? Is that the other sees our value, saves us, right? A more recent example, because it was seen as supposedly Afrofuturism, was Black Panther, right? Supposedly there's this other world, but what does it end up doing? Saving the US, right, with the help of a white CIA agent. So I think Waterworld is typical, like I would like to, but I'm not that sort of cinema studies scholar, have a chart of the various ways in which this gets played out. And Waterworld would be one in which, we're flawed. Avatar would be another, right? We're flawed. We're pretty crap as a species, and these beings that are better than us implicitly, nevertheless, they want to save us because we're us, right? So that even when we do contemplate that we haven't been the best, and we do think of it as a species, even though it's not the species, even though we haven't been the best, anyone would want to save us, right? So that's my reading of Waterworld.
Now, I was going to say that is the critique. I mean, I like Black Panther for several reasons.
Yeah.
That I think has nothing to do. But I think almost every black person who has something to critique about that film,
Yeah.
it is specifically that it is they move away from who they are to save a world that has actually nothing to do with them.
And but has like the happy ending.
Right. And then
Isn't
Bucky is like, why is he even there?
I mean,
Like,
it's. I think
Winter Soldier.
Black Panther and Avatar are almost identical. There's this utopian world of non-violence,
Right.
non-hierarchical, highly sophisticated, self-autopoietic system, right? That is threatened from outside, and outside is capitalist America, because there's the real America and then there's capitalist. Like the real America is worth saving, and capitalist is this small corporate portion. Both of those, it's actually both Pandora and Wakanda wouldn't have survived if it weren't for the help of one lone whitey. Right? And then they realise, oh my goodness, we have to save the world, which is white America.
Right.
So, and I do think it's interesting, and what I think is, as you say, Black Panther is a really enjoyable, interesting, fascinating film, probably more than Waterworld, definitely more than Avatar. But it is that even when there's an attempt, right, it's like, but come on, you'd save us in the end, right? You wouldn't kill us, right? You'd come back to, because we imagine, even when there's so many post-apocalyptic films that indict humanity, that really say you've been, the alien comes in the day after, the Earth stood still, right?
Yeah, the day the Earth
comes
stood
in,
still.
you've been really proud. Yeah, we have, but really dig down, the future is going to be one in which we're worth saving. We constantly play that experiment that we're not worth saving, and that seems to create, but you've got to save us now because, we got the good version has to emerge, right? So, that's,
Go ahead.
Do you have anything I'm thinking about this concept of sort of like what is worth saving, and then coming back to this concept that like somehow culture and that idea of that as a human aspect.
Yeah.
What do we think about like the remnants of that culture which already are like preserved, such as the Voyager probes, or even archaeological digs and those sorts of things? How is that separate from this project of saving?
Right. I mean, okay, so the easy answer is when we think of what is precious and must be saved, we're very selective. So, I mean, it would be not remarkable to put the lament over Notre Dame as opposed to all the other buildings. Okay, so that's the short answer is like we utterly mourn, right, when something of our past gets saved. I would just want to add to that I think, so this is a section of a book that's about the cinematic, right, that we have to, my other thing that I want to question is the art gallery or museum where I walk through and here's a fragment of Egypt and here's a fragment of the 18th century and this sort of book of wonders. So we're cinematic animals, but we're also, I can look at what happens when we go to an art gallery. I look at something and I see it as a fragment of the world. Right? That's the Western notion of civilization, right? That I can not only do that, but when I teach a literature course, I teach some Plato, I'll teach some Milton, I'll teach some Blake, and I try and tell my students that it's a window onto a world, right? And we have to somehow expand our horizons. Now, I like doing that, that's the way I was brought up, but it's not the way most humans think of what it is to be human, right? And you can have, sorry to just refer to my own cultural context, but in Indigenous Australia, you hand down, like cultural memory is not you're remembering something from 5,000, you keep changing it, like you corrupt it, right? So it's now it's like you've got Back to the Future 4 but no Back to the Future 1, right? There just keeps being the sequel, it's unsigned. So in some ways you could say this culture has no memory, right? It's not that it doesn't have a calendar memory, it doesn't have a museum memory where this is 18th century, this is 19th century, this is the Aboriginal people, this is the people from New Guinea, right? It's all one undifferentiated, constantly mobile mass. So I think I was quite happy when Notre Dame burned down for a tin cover, right? And you know, and there's this panic, like, so if you're in a literature department and you used to teach Ulysses, you wonder how long can you teach that, right? Because like, will students ever have the reading to be? And I used to be, well, how can you teach Madame Bovary all these things when students don't have the background to read that? And I used to, why do I care? Like, a world without Ulysses is not the end of the world, right? A world without Plato is not the end of the world, right? A world without some form of thinking, right, might be the end of the world, but no, it doesn't. It's an archive to which I'm attached, right? Possibly you're attached, right? It composes who we are, but it's not non-negotiable or unthinkable that could go, right? We might all end up like Mexico then, right? And that's not Mexico is not the end of the world, which is not to romanticize it. It's not to say that it's problem-free, right, or that it's innocent, or that it's a space outside North America, right? But it's not the end of the world. Right? It's the end of our world, which is the world right now.
Any other questions or comments? Go ahead.
Maybe real quick, I haven't seen the film in a while, but Walkabout.
Oh, yeah. That's such a good film.
I thought I should just...
Yeah, just as, because for the Australian in the room, yeah.
But the notion of the end of the world, right? And so it's these children, right, who observe the end of this Western construction, and they're forced to, navigate. And I can't remember the conclusion of the film. I need to see it again.
Right. So this is where I go back to, like, what is the politics of this? Because, a glib feminist, Marxist, post-colonial reading is these are two very white English, I mean, it's an English film, it's an Alan Bond, it's set in Australia, right? So Outback Australia is, I mean, you can romanticize the end of the world, but it's still the end of the world, right? So they step outside as children, and they have to be children, right? Because they've got this unencumbered gaze, and they get taken up by David Gulpilil, right? Australia had one Aboriginal actor for my entire, who played everything, right? Just like, let's call David Gulpilil. So they get the Aborigine that Australia had on call, and they do go through this profound experience, but that's on a par with saying I took LSD and I went through a profound experience, or I had a new, so encountering that world is a sort of existential, mind-altering, thin veneer of civilization, and you see life as it really is. Experiment before you go back, right? And I think it's on a part, like Alan Bond who wrote the screenplay, comes out of a British tradition which is supposedly sort of Marxist radical, which is about what happened, like Lord of the Flies, what happens when all this goes away, but it's about we have to look within ourselves, heart of darkness. We have to look within ourselves to our heart of darkness, and what you see is Africa or Indigenous Australia, right? It's still within, I would say, a fiction of humanity. I love the film, right? You can love a completely politically flawed film. But it's other people aren't really other people. They're our existential imaginary that we have to, you should go out to the outback, get stoned with an Aborigine once, and then go back to your middle class existence and realise how empty it is. But you should still go back to your middle class existence, right? That's my reading of Walkabout.
I was stunned for a moment because you brought Ulysses up. And just recently had
Not
a little bit of
Ulysses.
trauma with Ulysses.
Right.
And I want to ask the pragmatic.
Yeah.
So, having just suffered the trauma of finishing
Yeah.
Ulysses after 8 years of trying
Yeah.
for a class, which I was forced to take as a student who's trying to become a teacher,
Yeah.
what should I look forward to?
What's the meaning of Ulysses?
Well, no.
Yeah.
I'm not really interested.
So this is where I think it comes down to hardcore, immediate political questions, right? Of like diversity and inclusion and what we teach. I feel I'm like right on the edge of but clearly not because you've just read it, at the edge of the generation that was taught enough European philosophy, enough of the canon of Western literature to be able to read Ulysses, and then I do teach a page of it, right, to my intro to reading class, to tell them about modernism and disembodied voices and so on. But that grand apparatus of reading, either, I say, for the sake of cultural capital, I give that to you so you can, bestow it, impose it upon someone else. And when you've paid your dues in a canon like that, when you've read a lot of European philosophy and a lot of European modernism, it's very existentially confronting to not want that to continue. That's privilege, right? But the books, that's why I think these questions come down to the books we teach on a syllabus. And instead of saying, like when I was starting out, I did my degree in Romanticism. It was all white male poets, right? Just as I finished my PhD, it started to be you had to include women, right? And obviously that's changed now, right? You can't have... But the point is, I think we either do it that way, which is we get humanity and we do this, but that's got to kind of come to a breaking point, right? Where the types of things we read that require this huge apparatus of the past, right? That's the game changer. Now, I'm invested in that, but what I think is it's unthinkable for people like me to imagine that going away, but I think we should think about that, right? And maybe it's okay, like, there's this thing I tell my, like, really undergrads, right? Like, you'd be embarrassed, wouldn't you, if, or you'd think someone was embarrassing if they didn't know who Shakespeare was, right? And they go, yeah, you should know who Shakespeare was. Or you'd be embarrassed if you didn't know who wrote Hamlet. Now, I think that question's got, how many more years before there's like, I don't care about who Shakespeare was, I don't care. But I think that then we shouldn't be panicked. Like, it's not the end of the world, right? If that's an answer to your question. Right? It would be okay to get through a degree at university and not have read Ulysses. I can't believe I'm saying it, but that's the upshot of what I'm arguing, even if in my heart of hearts I don't believe it. Why don't I believe it? Because I want to replicate people like me, but I shouldn't want to do that, right?
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, what did you think about, during the summer, the rainforest was on fire, and then the G5 was telling Brazil, you guys need to put your fires out.
Yeah.
And do you think that, they had a right to tell Brazil how to handle the situation?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's...
Kind of us and them.
It is an us and them, but it's also utterly hypocritical. I mean, to put it this, you're behaving badly. I mean, the bottom line is we're behaving badly. So there's the sheer hypocrisy of it. But I think then the thing that I'd want to sort of like to bring it back into the types of things I was arguing is we expect to outsource our fragility, right? And we don't expect the rest of the world to behave with brazen forms of hyper-consumption and short-term existence. But we have, because the world exists when, I mean, the fact that we export most of our waste to China, for example, right? We expect it to be there when we've finally depleted all our own resources, just as a lot of post-apocalyptic cinema expects to colonize outer space, right? And as that, there'll always be somewhere else we can either outsource our fragility to or reinforce our resources. So I think that what we thought was, it's a good point, what we thought was an exceptional circumstance in Brazil, right, is actually just the day-to-day order where we're trying to police how the rest of the world manages. What we think of as our, because I think one of the motifs that I thought was the most obscene was they were destroying the world's carbon sink, right? And when they say that, they mean our carbon. They don't mean the Maldives carbon sink.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're out of time here, so let's thank Claire one more time for coming.
Don't we, by
Sorry?
7? We have to evacuate.
Yeah, so, that is the end of the world. That's
Yeah.